All right, thank you guys so much. We are working our way through Gebser, and on a very quick channel update. Last week when I did my mythical temporicity lecture, and I thought it was really profound how the characteristics of the magic structure were manifest even in the phonetic utterances of these words. I ended the recording and closed my computer, and my girlfriend said, "Yeah, that wasn't profound at all. I don't know why you were acting like that was such a big deal. That didn't seem profound." So I'm going to be going away for a little while. My lawyer said 25 to life. Still trying to figure out what that means. But in the meantime, we're going to try to work our way through Gebser. We are doing the spatial emphasis of the mental structure. Now, remember, last week I gave you a homework assignment. What do you think the mental conception or interpretation, so to speak, of time is? Please leave um, what you think in the comments, and don't feel discouraged because you got it wrong. If you watch this and you realize, yeah, I was way off. If you would have asked me that question before I read this, I would have told you the invention of clocks. That would have been my answer. So I promise you what you thought of was not dumber than my answer there. So this is going to be a longer video. We're going to skip a little part of it. There's a myth in here that I'm just not going to pretend I'm the best at myth interpretation. This has inspired a new love for myth, but I still have to read those. So let's just get right into it. He says, and also, I'm going to try to speak a little slower because when I obviously don't have a microphone or a great one, and you guys are trying to learn, hopefully. So I'm going to try to speak a little slowly so you guys aren't constantly going back, what do you say? What do you say? And you can hear me enunciate fully. I apologize if that was a problem. Um, I think, oh no, I thought I had my shirt on backwards. Okay. In order for us to demonstrate the temporicity of the mythical structure, it was necessary to go back to the question of its spacelessness. Excuse me. Similarly, if we wish to describe the spatial preoccupation of the mental structure, it would be necessary for us first of all to inquire as to its form of time. Yet the question of "time" is one that has resisted philosophical attempts to resolve it for some 2,500 years, despite the many individual solutions, explanations, or abstractions which it has brought to light. Now, it is not our intent to provide a philosophical solution to this age-old question, nor to seek one out in the results of discoveries in the sciences, for even a psychological point of departure would be irrelevant here in that it represents only a partial aspect, partly philosophical, partly scientific. We shall accordingly have to find a different point of departure. The temporicity of myth differs from the temporality of the mind. The temporistic movement of nature and the cosmos is unaware of the temporal phases of past, present, and future. It knows only the polar self-complementarity of coming and going, which completely pervades it at all times. Hopefully we covered that in the last one. Everything just coming and going, midday and midnight. There is no noon, or I guess that would be midday. There's no 3:20. There's no afternoon. It's just midday and midnight. We cycle through, baby. Let's see. Which completely pervades it at all times. It is devoid of directionality, whereas the past and the future, viewed from the present of any given person, are temporal directions. It is this directional character of "time" which underscores its mental nature and therefore its constitutional difference from natural cosmic temporistic movement, which is mythical in nature. Or we might say that time differs from temporicity because of its directedness, and hence a retrogression into mythical movement can neither answer nor resolve the question as to the nature of our mental time. So we're seeing the key aspect of rationality, directed thoughts, manifest in our understanding of time, the mental conception of time. So time is as he said, it is direction based, as opposed to the mythical temporicity that is both still and in movement, in perpetual kind of cyclical movement. Remember the 2D flat circle, there's no direction here. The direction is already presupposed. There's nowhere to go. But with mental, we can go left, right, north, south, whatever we want to do. So a key difference between mental time and mythical temporicity is its directedness. Also, and as he says, past, present, and future. These are temporal directions. Future is forward, north, whatever you want to call it. Past, backwards, south. Present, whatever, now. These are temporal directions. That was not a thing until the mental consciousness structure. So you're not going to see that pop up often in ancient Greece, and you're not going to see it pop up often until 1500. So that's a key, huge difference between mental time and mythical temporicity. Now, another key point, time, in essence, is a divider, or excuse me, a partitioner and a severer. So a partitioner of, or divider, so to speak, of essentially temporal units, time units, and it divides. So as of right now, it's 5:18 p.m. as of recording this. It partitions, right? So it's 5:18. It is not 5:19. It is not 5:17. It is not 5:18 a.m. It's 5:15 p.m. So it partitions, as in it separates or divides, a key characteristic of the mental conscious structure and rational thought, these little measurable time units that have almost been spatialized, and partitions them from each other. So it's a partitioner and a severer. What does it sever? Excuse me. It severs the image of the old world. Emphasis on the word image, of course. Remember the mythical consciousness structure, born from the discovery of the soul, and then we retreat to the imagination to create myths and great narratives to shape and craft images that touch aspects of the soul to carry the spirit forward. But it's in the imagination. It's all image. We get the picture of it. I get the picture. That's where that derives from. Remember, the 2D flat circle was an image. So the mental time has severed that image with its directionality. It cut through it. So mind is a partitioner, a severer, and another key differentiator between mental time and mythical temporicity is the direction. Past, present, future. Back in the day, you just kind of had midday, midnight, night and day cycling. There wasn't really a ton of direction there. Okay. Oh. Let us rather proceed along a route which we have taken before and inquire into the root of the word time. This is so fast. I love this stuff. When we do this, that's why I'm single now, because I find this profound. When we do this, we discover that all the words of our familiar languages for quote unquote time, English time, German Zeit, Latin tempus, French temps, and so on, can be traced back to the Indo-Germanic root da, D-A. I'd be very interested in seeing that. I'm not denying what he's saying, but we have encountered this root before. It also formed the Greek verb dio, D-A-I-O, which in the Ionian dialect, the original language of Greek philosophy, meant, quote, to divide, to take apart, to lay apart, to tear apart, to lacerate, unquote. In Sanskrit, the root forms the words dayat, D-A-Y-A-T-E, and deity, D-A-Y-A-T-I. That is, he divides, he cuts. On this, the German word for, quote, part or share, tail, is base, T-E-I-L. And the root is also the basis of the word demonic, as we have discussed earlier. That's the thing, demonic. So this division, this tearing apart, this lacerating, tearing, dividing, laying apart, that's rational consciousness, baby. That's taking the whole and dividing so one can confer a synthetic unity, dividing that which is quantifiably measurable and consciously known, and dividing component parts in whatever is being perceived from each other so you can deploy perspectival thought and attain a more accurate understanding of reality of what it is you're considering. Not a problem unless you deploy in areas where it does belong. But yeah, demonic. You can see this how rationalism would be demonic because you've torn everything apart and you haven't united anything. Terrible. He says, quote unquote, time, in other words, conveys the idea that it is a divisor, separating as well as cutting asunder. But a divider of what? We may be permitted the question, although we know today that time, and we will discuss this in detail below, has become an abstraction. The word has shared the same fate as other concrete mythical images, which have, without exception, become transformed into rational concepts in the mental realm. So all these great stuff from mythical, like you said, what do you say? Mythical images, they've just become this concept of the archetypes. It's like, no, they're infinitely more profound than that. You are reducing their profundity because you cannot even imagine it. You don't have the right tool to see it. So, as to our question of what quote unquote time in fact divides, we have an answer if we remain cognizant of the mythical configuration. We have noted repeatedly that magic occurs in the dark, indeed in darkness itself, while myth occurs in the night and dreams where a twilight is already evident. But the mind or the mental presents itself in the brightness of daylight. There was once a close relationship between the day and time. Indeed, there is a certain degree of identity between them, inasmuch as both words can be traced to the same root. But in a preeminently nocturnal world, what can the significance be of utilizing a root with the inherent meaning of quote, to divide, to sever, unquote, to form a word expressing the day, if not to convey at the outset of the mental structure that the day, as opposed to our present day sense, was a divider and partitioner of the night. So because the unperspectable world, darkness was kind of privileged, so to speak. Remember, we only really discovered light and that sort of clarity that it confers with the mental structure. Now we've stepped into the light of clear thought. Now we can think clearly. That didn't happen until during the unperspectable world. Everything was done in dark. So if you have time and that root goes back to divider, what is it dividing? The night, because everything was done in the night, and that sort of time and day is what divided the night. Time is what divided the night. Yeah. With the awakening of the mental structure, as diurnal things gradually assume a greater importance than those of the nocturnal and twilight realm, the quote-unquote everyday world comes into greater prominence. Not only does right-handed movement take precedence over left-handed or leftward movement, which always reverts to darkness, as we have seen, but there is an ascendancy of directness and direction as the quote-unquote right usurps the non-directional nature of circularity. Those things which man prepares for himself predominate over things that simply lie in readiness for him. In this connection, it is no accident when we speak of preparing meals, whenever we mean mealtime. So, very interesting. So, when you're preparing a meal, it's like you said, there's things which man prepares for himself. So, this is man using his free will, stepping into the clarity of light, and imposing his will on nature. And in this case, it's just preparing meals. But there's a different way of viewing this, right? So you could view it as meal time. So meals are day-to-day things, he says, accomplishments or actions determined by time. Meal times are the preeminent daily affairs. The time for eating was time, kat exigent, time as such. Our very word meal time is revealing in this respect, as it is formed on both the root ma mi and da di, that is, measures and divides, and the affairs of the day are oriented around it. And you also see this other use of meal time. A certain unit of time has been established and divided and set into a rigid place. So at this particular time, it's meal time, right? One, it presupposes that meal time is a thing, it is a singular unit, and two, it rigidifies it to this one particular moment during the day. So pretty interesting ideas of the mental conception of time. Excuse me. Okay, so next he gets into the myth. It's the myth of I don't know. He talks about Dorset. I'm not saying it's not interesting, but I'm not going to lie to you and pretend like I'm super well versed in that stuff. And I just worry I'm not going to be sufficient in actually effectively communicating the wisdom from that to you. So I apologize. If you really want me to try, just leave a comment. But okay. Let's see. So he says time and day. He says once again there is evidence that time and quote time and the quote unquote day are essentially the same. Both divide the night. For the root from which dice, D-A-I-S, and quote-unquote time are derived is identical to that for quote-unquote day. And Zeus, the bright god, who dwells on Mount Olympus and not in the mountain or cavern. So if Zeus is on top of the mountain, he is in the light. He can see and sort of take in the light. But if someone's in the cavern, now unfortunately this references the myth we just skipped, so don't get too confused. But if you're a myth, you're in that cavern of darkness. That's magical consciousness. Both are dividers of the night. Oh, there you go. At the outset, day and night are not opposites. We make them antithetical by our way of thinking. The partitive brightness of the day is merely a principle, expressing attentiveness and wakefulness. The complement of the night was quote unquote 8 or oct, just as sleep was the complement of wakefulness. So another good way of trying to understand that natural temporicity and that sort of 2D polar circle, think about just put the mental measuring of time aside and just think about the bright sky like it is today, and then think about the darkness at night. And think about how they constantly just cycle in on each other every day, so to speak, every 24 hours or whatever it is. It's always night, and then the brightness comes, and then the darkness comes, and then the brightness comes, and it just keeps going. This is that sort of very basic way that they understood things. I think it's a pretty simple way that anyone could really do to try to understand this natural temporicity. And this is the way everything kind of flowed. Let's see. This also explains, okay, and since we can consider the day and time in this manner, we can also think of mythical temporicity as being quote unquote nocturnal and mental time as being quote unquote diurnal time. But as we do not wish to imply that they are antithetical, it is perhaps best if we stay with the terms quote temporicity and quote unquote time, particularly as they have the further distinguishing characteristic that the one is rhythmic, the other metric, i.e. measured and measuring. So there you go. So if we use temporicity, we're going to be talking about mythical's conception of time. Like I just said, the day and night, midday, midnight, they just kind of flow in each other. It's rhythmic, the 2D circle, whereas mental time is measured. With the eruption of the mental structure, the dice principle, as the divisor or partitioner, is not only destructive but also has a preeminently constitutive aspect. The root word die has at the beginning the dual denotation of quote unquote giving as well as quote unquote dividing. And the moment this dual principle becomes effective, the mental structure with its temporal character is also present, but it divides and thus destroys the image of the world, which is replaced by a conception of the world. So that's what I was talking about earlier. Mental time severs. It severed the image of the world because remember, imagination, crafting and shaping of images, yada, yada, yada. And we have replaced it with a mental abstract conception. My neighbor's mowing the lawn. I apologize if it's loud. I didn't know he'd do that. He says, let's see. Having again touched upon the darkness and obscurities, let us not lose sight of the illuminating point of departure for our journey over the previous several pages, that all words in our familiar language expressing quote unquote time go back to the word root da-di, da colon di. And then he says there's a remark on etymology on page 558 that we can check. Time, we reiterate, is a divider which partitions as well as severs. It severs not itself, but rather the ger principle, the temporistic and mythical image of the world, that 2D circle. Just as the demonic is at first nothing other than the quote unquote severance of myth, not without good reason does Harrison speak of the demonic character of dice, D-A-I-S. So is time, in the sense of a directed course of events, something utterly different from the non-directed and autonomous reversional movement of myth with respect to dimensions. Time, that is, our mentally oriented conception of time, the divider of mythical movement and the partitioner of the circle, severs its two-dimensionality and thereby creates the possibility of three-dimensional space. So that's another thing. When I say time, we're going to be talking about mental time, the abstract concept. And then temporacy will be that mythical understanding. So what's happening is the 3D aspects have essentially destroyed the 2D aspects. And our mental conception, though limited and rationalist, I'll probably do a rationalist, kill rationalism video about this one day. It still does act as a constitutive of the spatial world. It's not quite reaching its potential, but we'll get there. Let's see. Immeasurable and quote unquote lasting agitation is a form of expression of the mythical structure. Timelessness is another form of expression, that of the magic structure. Time as a conceptualization and concept and as a measuring element. So of course, this is the obvious mental consciousness structures, manifestations of it, right? Not only are we seeing the divisiveness, not only are we seeing the spatialization, right? So we're making these sort of time units, and we put 520 or 530 or whatever it is. These are kind of time units, units being a spatialized object. You're not treating time as its own unique problem. And then, of course, you have measurement, right? We're measuring things. Oh, yeah, it's 7 o'clock. Oh, yeah, you ran that mile in 6.5 minutes. We can measure these things, and that's obviously what we're doing rationally. In order for us to rationally consider something, it must be measurable. There's really no getting around that. Is that another one? The mythical form of expression evidences an increase in dimensions over against the magic, the mental an increase over the mythical, since magic timelessness is pre-dimensional, mythical temporicity non-dimensional, and only mental temporality one-dimensional or dimensional in the strict sense. That's kind of a weird paragraph. Let's see. These increments in dimensionality must be borne in mind, just as we must not lose sight of the fact that mythical agitation, temporicity, and duration must not be placed in opposition to our conceptual time, as this would account for only the mental factors and leave out our awareness of the structure of integral data and events. So take the point is, as we say, rationality puts things in dualistic opposition into one another, and puts things in dualistic opposition to each other. Rationality, born from the discovery of space, was not born from the discovery of time, so it is deficient in time. You want to be careful not to put aspects of time that you're thinking about in opposition to one another, because that's what rationality does. Rationality doesn't really belong here. To truly understand time, and that'll be at the very end of this video. You won't quite get it, but I'm going to spoil just a little bit. It requires a rationality. You will not be able to fully understand it through the limited means of rationality. You need to transcend that limited mode of thought. Let's see. If we make antithesis of mythical temporicity and mental temporality, or conceptual time, we are guilty of creating an inappropriate dualism. Inappropriate because these terms are not antithetical, but rather different in their constitutions. There you go. Let's see. This connection and interdependence, he had a couple paragraphs where he talks about the soul and time. Now, remember in the last video, the sort of understanding or realization of the polar complementarity of time and the movement that caused that, well, that same movement was perceived inside, and that discovered the 2D flat circle mythical cyclic nature of the soul, which is real, by the way. That is how the soul operates. There are two poles of the soul, life pole, death pole. You don't just privilege one or the other, though we cycle through them every day, every moment. They are a polar coexistence, not antitheticals. What I'm saying. So he's talking about that. He says, this connection and interdependence of the soul and time were perhaps most clearly perceived by Nicholas Chrysanus, who defined time in a sense appropriate to its nature as a mental phenomenon. In his dialogue, De Lubo Globi, I don't understand these guys, he writes, therefore time, the measure of movement, is an instrument of judgment. It's an instrument of judgment and understanding. The understanding soul, ratio anime, therefore is not dependent on time, but rather the understanding measure of movement, which is called time, is dependent on the understanding soul. For this reason, the understanding soul is not subject to time, but precedes time, just as sight precedes the eye. Although sight requires the eye, it does not proceed from the eye, since the eye is merely the instrument. So this idea of time as the measure of movement, who's doing the measuring? Who's the one sort of manipulating time? That would be you. We precede the mental understanding of time. The mental conception of time was born from the soul, but that soul preceded it, and that soul was you. That's you. So we kind of use mental time as a tool almost. Let us take note of this result. Our conceptual time is not a psychic but a mental phenomenon which proceeded from the psychic. So there you go. Time proceeds from the soul. It is the line that severs the circle, and thus forms the basic dimension of a four-dimensional space. By virtue of the fact that it was itself divided, time became measurable, but it thereby forfeited its original character. So because time divides, now things can be measured because you've established that distance in space, which confers even more distance, which consolidates our knowledge of things. This is not that, and we can derive meaning from that. So that's part of it. In the course of philosophical speculation, it was to a great extent spatialized and, as it has a spatializing tendency, was to a considerable extent dementalized. This transposition or reversal is a typical speculatio rationis. The divider, instead of being treated as such, is itself divided. Commensurately with this transposition, there is necessarily a devaluation of the concept of time, which engenders a manifest debasement of time, particularly in the wake of the discovery of perspective and the complete spatialization of the world. So time is itself a divider, and now we are going to, in an almost meta way, divide time, and we're going to see some of the bad consequences from that again. So the problem here, time is its own unique particular function, its own unique problem. What we're doing is we are taking the rational spatialization hair splitting to time, which is not conducive to that, and we're essentially just hair splitting it apart. Obviously, that's not a good thing. Don't be a rationalist. And then he's talking about the spatial emphasis of the mental structure. He says, W. Gent, a distinguished authority on the time question, has repeatedly called attention to the quote-unquote modern tendency to devalue time. Here it is. As in the following statement, it is really not surprising that even in the work of Thomas Hobbes, we can discern a disdain of anything having to do with time, for to him also the spatial world is immeasurably closer. And with respect to Descartes, he writes, when he describes time as ens in anima, E-N-S-I-N anima, he is unquestionably devaluating it over against space. This represents naturalism as a worldview. Time has no proper place within his system. And again, for such men as William Gilbert, Johann Kepler, and Galilei, time does not represent a special problem. It surfaces in their work merely as a numerical quantity in the form of infinitesimal time segments. So this is what we do, right? We start to attribute these sort of spatialized units to time, and it's 12, it's 1 o'clock. Great, okay, but we're still going to go deeper in that. So then you go 59 all the way down to the 1, and then you go back to 12 noon. But then you can do seconds and milliseconds and hours and all this stuff. We're just dividing. And when rationality, which privileges space, uh, sort of posits space against time, it's always going to privilege space because that is that's the key ingredient that allows it to function. So don't do that, because when you do, you pervert and bastardize time on its own. You just have to deploy a different mode of thought to understand it. Don't do that. He said the spatial emphasis of this mental structure is also expressed in its dualization of time. From Duns Scotus to Volkelt, including Locke, Kant, and Bergson, it is separated into the objective time of things and the subjective time of the soul, or into some other conceptual dualism. As we have said, this is a speculatio rationis. But it is precisely these recurrent attempts to dualize time, whether as Bergson's antithesis of time versus natural quote-unquote duration, or understood as being in opposition to itself as begun by Aristotle and continued down through Volkelt, which are in danger of a deficient psychization or mythologization. It is not our intent to adduce the numerous examples which any history book of philosophy can furnish as proof of this psychization, but only to note a symptomatic example from Aristotle. He proceeds from the point of view that the quote-unquote now does not exist, since it is once the end of the past and the beginning of the future. Consequently, he considers it to be merely a kind of quote-unquote in-between spatialization, which interrupts or interlinks as a fixed point in space a time without beginning or end. Why did I not? This is weird. This apostrophe may well be an unconscious reversion to the mythical attitude, one whose impact is not lessened by the fact that Aristotle implicitly places past and future into opposition and thereby dualizes them. At the same time, he attributes to them a psychic lack of beginning and end. So this is what we do. We have separated and divided past and future, and we have put them in opposition to one another. These negate one another. The past is not the future. They are opposites. You cannot have them both at the same time. That's a contradiction. Don't do that. Let's see. It is no longer merely oriented, but has the additional and deficient aspects of spatiality. In the sense of in-betweenness, the now is a conceptual positing as a part of time, a definitely spatializing and rationalizing act of consciousness applied not to space, but to time, which spatializes space. Oh, my goodness, almost fell there. So there you go. So he says, this setting fast of time as quote unquote in betweenness is a perversion of time, since time thereby acquires spatiality and ceases to be the initiator and function of space as a result of its partitive and severing characteristic. Time, and with it the temporal as well as the timeless, is a basic constituent of space. I'm going to repeat for emphasis. Time, and with it the temporal as well as the timeless, is a basic constituent creator of space. It is not a part of space, that is, a disqualified dimension, but its very basis and basic dimension. This dimension is only today coming to awareness, or more exactly, is only able to come to awareness when it is no longer conceived of as quote unquote time, movement, or timeless being. That is to say, it's no longer bastardized by the mental, mythical, and magical consciousness structures, but as the presence of origin. One point of departure for this kind of time concretion today is the fact that time is considered to be quote unquote reversible, a manifestation of a pervasive departure from the rationalistic and perspectivistic attitude, since time is then no longer divisive and directionally oriented in only one sense. So if time is a constitutive or creator of space, and instead of viewing it that way, you view it as a part of space and spatialize it through rational thought, it is no longer time, really. It has become space. So time, actual time, not mental time, but the constituent of space is no longer the constituent because it is no longer time. It has become space. You have this idea that space is the constituent of space, but that's not how it works. Time is the constituent of space. Time is energy, and we'll get there. Um, so you can't have a spatialized time and still have space. If time is the preceding creator of space, and you make that time as space, you can't have space because you need that necessary ingredient of time to create it, so you won't have anything. The division of measurable time into past and future is a form of deficient spatialization and psychization, if only because past and future are invariably characterized by their emphasis on joy and suffering. It is this characteristic of experiential tension that reveals the deficient and psychistic nature of the dualism. Anyone who indulges in this manner of thinking is confined to the psyche right down to the very level of his abstractions. He is a psychist, the unknown counterpart of the materialist. So stop dividing past and future into these separate things. I'm going to read that again. Hold on. If only because past and future are invariably characterized by their emphasis on joy and suffering. So this is a big problem with rationalism. Remember in my kill rationalism videos when I say you get so lost in the abstract, or when you deploy a rational thought in an area where it doesn't belong, the psyche worms its way back in there. So you've deployed it in an area where it doesn't belong. You've turned it into an abstract conceptualization, going too far on both fronts. And now the psyche has wormed its way back up, and depending on your experiences, you are going to have a psychic bias projected on the past and future. Like, for example, the future for me, and obviously, I have divided time into past and future. I mean, I wouldn't have even think to do otherwise until reading this. The future's always been kind of this scary thing for me. It's unknown. Maybe I'll fail at something or something like that. Where the past isn't that bad. I had a pretty good childhood. My parents, were good parents. They didn't like abuse me or anything. Maybe that's a little more like, oh, I have good memories of my childhood. So the psyche comes back and says, nope, future, that's anxious. That's all these emotions that you don't want. And the past could be the same, or it could just be, these are good things. Focus on the past. Do not do that. You are deploying a deficient spatialization in an area where it doesn't belong. And getting so abstract, the psyche's wormed its way back up, and now you're not dealing with time as its own problem, and in doing so, you cannot channel it healthily and have those powers sort of increase your abilities because now you are working with that energy and not working against it. This is manifest in the case of Volkelt, who devises an quote experiential time in his defense of the two-dimensionality of time. Quote unquote experiential time is of course merely a fiction. A phenomenon of the magic sphere, vital experience, cannot be merely coupled with a mental phenomenon, time, without rendering both phenomena and their respective spheres deficient. And this deficiency leads inevitably to a rational. Hold on, we're going to get into some good parts now. Excuse me, hold on. And this deficiency leads inevitably to a rational destruction of time, to that amorphous nothingness into which man in Heidegger's view is quote unquote thrown out of a worrisome quote unquote now. So if you've watched my interview, when I interviewed John David Ebert, he's a huge Heidegger nerd. He knows everything about Heidegger. So of course, when I read this for the first time, and I realized I was going to interview him, I was like, I have to ask him about this. So we're going to get into some critiques of Heidegger. And what he's really critiquing here is, being in time. That was one of Heidegger's big books. Time, remember, mental conception of time is already a divider. It is a partitioner which divides time units from each other and sort of orders them, and makes them rigid. It's 503. That's at one particular time. It's already a divider. So haven't we stopped doing this rationalist pseudo-philosophy dividing of dividers and spatializing the spaceless and getting lost in what we're about to get? Let's see, I want to go there. If we take Heidegger at his word, since he delights in taking statements at their word to the point of rationalizing them into formulas devoid of any content, so I love it when Gebser attacks the rationalists. Don't let the rationalists take what you say. Everyone has a functional understanding of the words you're using, and they will just hair split and pick it apart, and now it just doesn't mean anything. This is not intelligence. This is pedantry conflated with intelligence, okay? This is nonsense, and don't let them walk around with their fedoras pretending this is smart. It's not. If we take Heidegger at his word, since he delights in taking statements at their word to the point of rationalizing them into formulas devoid of any content, this quote unquote being thrown is itself evidence of the inhumanity of his philosophy. Parentheses. Earlier, only animals were quote unquote thrown, i.e., brought forth. So I know I got a couple of philosophy students going through this series with me. Love you guys. Maybe if you come up, bring this up, just be like, what do you think about this? What do you think about the inhumanity of Heidegger's philosophy? And he says Heidegger's philosophy is a clear example of the consequences of psychistic deficiency, for his positing of a nothing of nothingness in opposition to a being of being is surely nothing else than a rebellion of the one-time interpreter of Duns Scotus, who was, of course, I believe Heidegger did like his dissertation on Duns Scotus. He says, by abandoning the religious sphere surrounding the work of Duns Scotus in a mood of resentment and seeking to escape from its protective polarity by making it into a rational antithesis, Heidegger necessarily went astray in the wake of the incomplete transition. He did not realize in his psychic confinement that he was already operating in a different structure, substituting in his confusion a negative caricature of the mythical with its religious bond for the mental. Instead of transcending his point of departure, he negates it by his deficiency. And this means that at best there is a negative transcendence of his point of departure. It is the naught, the zero, the activated amorphous dust that triumphs in the negatively activated quote-unquote nothing of nothingness. It is no wonder that Heidegger accorded to care and worry such a crucial place in his philosophy. So essentially what I think this critique here is, and you philosophy guys might have to help me out because I'm not going to pretend to know a ton about Heidegger, or definitely not Duns Scotus. So it seems that Duns Scotus had this idea of being and nothing. Essentially, he just had the mythical consciousness interpretation of it, the most likely correct interpretation of it, the polar complementarity. Right? These aren't dualistic antitheses. But that's what Heidegger did. He substituted the polar complementarity for dualistic antitheses, and then what happened was he didn't realize he was doing this, and he essentially got so lost in the clouds that now to the point we're talking about nothing of nothingness and being of beingness. No wonder he describes that as inhumanity. of his philosophy. It's just rationalism, which is absurd. He said, let these brief remarks suffice to call attention to the perils inherent in the improper view and application of the purely mental conception of time to our spatial world and our lives. Dividing time, which is itself a divider, leads to atomization, whether of the ratio or of the spatial world. A psychistic mode of understanding leads to a deficient mythologization in the guise of an abstraction, and spatialization divests space itself of its foundation, time. So when you turn time into space, and space needs time to even exist, you're going to run into problems, my friend. You have just negated the thing that is fueling you. I'm going to read that again because it's important. Dividing time, which is itself a divider, leads to atomization, whether of the ratio or of the spatial world. A psychistic mode of understanding leads to a deficient mythologization in the guise of an abstraction, and spatialization divests space itself of its foundation. So we need to stop dividing time. Time, first of all, is already itself a divider. And we're going to get now the second part of the book, the second book, I should say. I got to, and it's so good so far. Oh, it's so good. We'll get there. Let's see. It should by now be evident from the above discussion that the spatial emphasis of the mental structure is threatened with the destruction of its laboriously achieved three-dimensionality. This threat lies in the amorphous nullity, which occurs whenever the concept of time is spatialized in a psychistic and deficiently mentalized manner. The spatialization is subject to dissolution because it destroys the very basis for space. We will see later on the degree to which our rational thought is a spatializing act and the expression of this spatialization. Here we would only note once again that the phenomenon of lack of time is characteristic of our material spatially accentuated world. How is anyone to have time if he tears it apart? It is sufficient for us to know that time ruptured the mythical circle and thus made possible our world of thought and detachment. Time, that is, the mental understanding of time. Let us take care that the inappropriate manipulation of time does not bring about its destruction and the destruction of what is dependent on it. Let us ensure that it is used effectively according to its nature in the fourth dimensionality, where it can establish a new possibility of the world, concretized and integrated, and superseding the mere spatial emphasis of the mind. So, a rational understanding of time, not this deficient rationality where we divide, and we get into this nihilistic, psychistic nonsense where we're not even being rational anymore, and we're not treating time as its own unique problem. Wherever time is able to become quote unquote the present, it is able to render transparent quote unquote simultaneously the timelessness of magic, the temporicity of myth, and the temporality of mind. There are already signs of this conceptual mutation, and that can be demonstrated, and it is the task of the second part of the present work to make this demonstration. What has been said up to this moment has endeavored to give evidence of the spatial emphasis of the mental structure on the basis of its principal component, time, and not, as before, on the basis of perspectivity. So, we're not quite done. If you're worried, if you want to know more about integral time and irrational time, do not worry. As he said, that's what the second book is about. So just keep watching this series. But because I love you guys and because I appreciate that you guys are continuing to watch, I'm just going to spoil you just a little bit. So why don't we skip ahead to book 2, and why don't we try to understand time on its own terms. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I'm only going to give you about 4 paragraphs, but it should be enough to whet your beak and to sort of kind of understand, to get you in that frame of mind and mode of understanding away from the perspectival, spatialized understanding of time. All right, so on page 285, which we're only on page 181, so 104 pages later, Gebser says this: to the perception of the aperspectival world, so that's the integral structures world, time appears to be the very fundamental function and to be of a most complex nature. So time is always going to be complex. Now, time here is actual time, not mental time. Mental time is the divider spatialized that we just went over. This, what he's talking about, is actual time. And he made this distinction. I just didn't read it because I skipped ahead. When he says time here, he means a rational time, integral time, not the deficient kind. and to be of a most complex nature. It manifests itself in accordance with a given consciousness structure and the appropriate possibility of manifestation in its various aspects as clock time, natural time, cosmic or sidereal time, as biological duration, rhythm, meter, as mutation, discontinuity, relativity, as vital dynamics, psychic energy, and thus, in a certain sense, in the form we call quote unquote soul and the quote unquote unconscious, and as mental dividing. Repeat that for emphasis. Clock time, natural time, cosmic or sidereal time, as biological duration, rhythm, meter, as mutation, discontinuity, relativity, as vital dynamics, psychic energy, and as mental dividing. It manifests itself as the unity of past, present, and future. The unity of past, present, and future. We are not dividing them and placing them in opposition to each other. They're not even really divided. They are all integrated into the perpetual flux and the perpetual present. Let's see. The unity of past, present, and future. As the creative principle, the power of imagination as work and even as motoricity. And along with the vital, psychic, biological, cosmic, rational, creative, sociological, and technical aspects of time, we must include, last but not least, physical geometric time, which is designated as the quote-unquote fourth dimension. So, as you can see, it seems to be time, and I will admit I haven't gone too far past this, so maybe I'll rephrase this, seems to be a quantifiably immeasurable energy that manifests in different modes that acts as a constituent of space. So duration allows us to do things in this world. Relativity allows certain spatialized objects to move or do things, exist, change. So that seems to be what it is. Quantifiably immeasurable energy that has a ton of different modes of manifestation that allows the spatial world to exist, that creates the spatial world. There you go. He said the seemingly random enumeration of temporal aspects may be disconcerting to someone unable to disengage himself from his three-dimensional conception of the world, rationalness. To a systematician, these aspects will seem to be incongruent quantities. They are not. But they are not quantities. They are elements and functionals which cannot be conceived of or arrayed in spatial terms. They are element and functionals which cannot be conceived of or arrayed in spatial terms. Put the spatial mental crap aside when you're dealing with time. The apparent lack of a system that seems to prevail in our enumeration, in fact, corresponds to the respective realities. So the lack of a system of all this stuff, the system derives from the mental structure. That's deficient, limited. He says, with the terms four-dimensional, and particularly fourth dimension, the form in which quote-unquote time is manifest in a physical sense, we have touched upon a key in a certain sense that can be of aid in clarifying our predicament. The fact that the vast, complex quote-unquote time, encompassing and co-constituting the world, has been ignored for centuries, even excluded from knowledge, or at best falsely spatialized, has left us unprepared to cope with the extraordinary implications of the phenomenon of time just when modern knowledge thrusts it on our attention. So as this sort of discovery of time that birthed the integral structure, the irrational world, because we're so lost in our rational hair splitting and spatialization, we are struggling to actually deal with it on its own terms, and now we're going to see problems because we're not dealing with it as its own. We're not respecting it. We're disrespecting it by treating it as if it's a spatial consideration. That's mental stuff, not integral. As long as the epoch paid tribute to the three-dimensional world conception, time remained a suppressed force, and as such appeared with a vengeance when it was finally freed or freed itself. Like any suppressed or repressed force, when first released it overpowers, frightens, and confuses us in a destructive manner and seems to hold the upper hand. Because we are accustomed for generations to the old conception, we thought ourselves able to dominate it with our spatializing falsification. Well, rationality worked for all this other stuff. Look, rationality worked for all this spatial stuff. It's got to be good for time. No, time's not spatial, so no. Imprisoned in our three-dimensional conceptual world, we believe time to be no more than an easily subdued and harmless accessory which could be employed with impunity merely as clock time. Repeat for emphasis. Imprisoned in our three-dimensional conceptual world, we believe time to be no more than an easily subdued and harmless accessory which could be employed with impunity merely as clock time. That's one manifestation of the energy of time. And it's nice because it can be spatialized and it can be clock time. What is this? It's 6:02. We know exactly. We just broke down time into spatialized units. That's clock time. That's why rationality likes to keep it that way. Since it turns out that there is much more, indeed is a world constituent, that time is much more, indeed is a world constituent, the degree of repercussions in the wake of this knowledge has been in proportion to the discrepancy between our previous estimation of time and its actual and enduring efficacy. But this discrepancy is so pronounced that we can only gradually realize that time means more than clock time. So essentially what that means, because we've gone so far in the rationalization and the spatialization of time, and because we've done it so much, the negative effects of its eruption into our consciousness, real time, not just mental temporality, but actual time, integral, irrational time, we rationalized it, we tried to shove it down, and now proportionally it's going to match that. So the more you deploy the wrong tool, the worse the effects will be. And that, I think, is where we will stop now. I believe you guys are going to get two videos today. This and another kill rationalism video. So I really hope you guys learned something. Again, please let me know in the comments what you guys thought mental time was. Again, do not feel stupid if you got it wrong. My answer would have been the invention of the clock. I guarantee you it would have been more intelligent than that, okay? I love you guys so much. I appreciate you guys. Thank you guys so much for continuing to watch this. It really means a lot to me. And we'll be doing, what do we have next? Let's see what we have next, shall we? All right, what do we got? I think, yes, I believe we have on the history. Yep. So next, my friends, we are getting on the history of the phenomena of soul and spirit, my friends. So if you thought the time was profound, we're getting to the bottom of soul and spirit. This is what I like about Gebser. The rationalists do not understand profundity. I'm probably going to make a rationalism video about that. But next up, we're getting into soul and spirit. We're getting back in the good old days. We're looking back at our ancestors and treating them with the respect that they deserve. So thank you guys again. I love you guys. I hope you guys are doing great. Love you guys. Thank you.